Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is a weekend edition, and in some respects, year-end edition. It is the last day of 2021, and then we will be into 2022. So, of course, since it's the last day, a little bit later, we'll be talking about how if you've been waiting to the last moment, and I know some of you tend to do that, and like to put us over the top in terms of your gift to Point of View, we are certainly encouraging you to do so. You can find some of that information on the website, but we will, as we oftentimes do on this particular program, do a roundtable discussion, and in studio with us, the Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty is Lathan Watts. Lathan, great to have you with us.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, we actually have a building that's somewhat closed down, so you had some difficulty, as did I, trying to get in here. But I
got a little creative, but here I am.
Yeah. Yes, so we got in past the security anyway, and are doing this broadcast from a building that, of course, many of you have had a chance to visit over the years. Also, to help us out, joining us by phone, Penna Dexter, of course, co-host. And Penna, how are you doing today?
Well, Kerby, I'm actually doing okay. The reason I'm by phone is because I actually have COVID. But I'm doing very well, and just don't want to spread anything here at the end of my infection. But it's interesting to be doing this year-end program today, because I think that COVID is the biggest story of the year.
We will certainly talk about that. Of course, we set a world record in the number of cases yesterday. More cases, new cases, 489,000 COVID cases in 24 hours. And so we will talk about what that might mean. I'll try to give a little bit of a positive as well. Since I love science, I found out that there are a couple of studies from both the Netherlands and South Africa suggesting maybe the T cells can be mobilized by vaccination and maybe have reduced the severity of Omicron. But since we are privileged to have somebody with First Liberty, I thought for just a few minutes, we've posted a couple of cases that would be probably good to talk about, Lathan. One of those we did chat about earlier in the week with Kelly, the Maine school choice case. And it's really an issue where I would encourage our listeners to pray, because I think this case, as well as maybe your Coach Kennedy case, could really change the whole dynamic of free exercise. But explain that to us, if you might.
Sure. So the case is out of the state of Maine, and Maine has a program. The state decided to do this program because there are areas of Maine where, especially very rural areas, where there aren't enough students to justify building a high school. And so to address that, the state decided they will use basically like a tuition scholarship program. So your tax money that would ordinarily go towards like the ISD where your kid would go, that money on a per student basis is given to those families who live in those areas where there isn't a high school. Then the family uses that money to pay tuition for a private school, since there's not a public school, unless they choose a private school that is religiously affiliated, and those schools are prevented from participating. So these parents who, under any other circumstances under this program, will be able to choose to send their kids wherever they want to, are prevented from sending their kids to a school that reinforces their religious beliefs. Now, there was a similar case out of Montana, almost identical program.
There you go.
In the previous Supreme Court term, the Supreme Court said, the state doesn't have to do a program like this, but if you do, you cannot discriminate against religious schools. If you open this program up, if this is how you decide to address this, you can't eliminate religion from it. And that builds upon that was the Espinoza decision out of Montana last year. But that builds upon other Supreme Court cases like Trinity Lutheran, where a church applied for a grant from the state to resurface the playground at their religious school that's affiliated with their church. And the state said, no, you can't because you're religious and that's, tax money and that somehow violates the Establishment Clause. And the Supreme Court, again, said, no, if you create a program like this, you cannot prohibit religious institutions from participating. So this case, the main case, is really building upon those precedents because typically when the Supreme Court issues a decision that protects religious liberty, as these do, you'll have some lower courts try to distinguish that decision when they don't want to implement it. And so there had been a split in the circuits on tuition programs like this, where some circuits said, well, okay, so the Supreme Court said you can't eliminate religious schools based on their status, just the fact that they are a religious school. But we think it's okay to eliminate them on religious use. Yeah. So they drew
status
a line,
versus use.
Very, very splitting hairs to say, well, if the money is going for religious use, then that's okay. You can prohibit that. And so this case will hopefully clarify that for the lower courts, where the Supreme Court will have the chance to say, we meant what we said. If you're going to do this, you can't prohibit these schools from participating. The state doesn't have to address the problem this way, but if you do, you can't say religious schools can't be a part of it. And I think it demonstrates a principle that a lot of our cases touch on, whereas government goes so far out of its way trying not to violate the Establishment Clause that they end up violating the Free Exercise Clause.
There you go.
So these families have free exercise rights, and participating in this program and wanting to send their kids to a school that reinforces what they're teaching at home and what their kids are learning at church, that's a free exercise right. And so it's kind of it's a case that touches on both. It clarifies that this isn't an Establishment Clause problem, and it also protects the free exercise rights of those families and those kids.
Penna, let me come to you because most of us around the table have had some of our kids in a Christian school or some kind of religious school. And so a ruling in Maine could be very significant in some of the Christian schools around the country, couldn't they?
Absolutely. It is so crucial. And I think if you just think about where we are as a culture right now, how education has been proven to be public education, especially, not only often teaching our kids things that aren't true and things that are detrimental to them, but also just not doing a good job. And so parents all over the country now are looking for alternatives to the public school. In Maine, of course, there is no public school for some people, and that's just because of the rural nature of a lot of Maine. But across the country, the need for school choice is just becoming more and more apparent. And if you have a victory in this third of a trifecta of cases going toward the Supreme Court, the first two have gone in a way that will enable us, I think, to open up school choice all over the country, especially if this one gets the right decision. What do you guys think?
I would think so. And we're coming to a break. Real short answer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we argued this case at the Supreme Court back in December. An oral argument went very well.
Yes.
It's tough to read the tea leaves, based on how oral argument went, and that's a dangerous game to try to predict it, but we had a good day.
Let me just mention, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about a couple of these cases having to do with the military, the Navy SEALs case and the Shields of Strength case. I might as well open up the phones because the phones are already ringing, and one of the callers wants to talk about what's going on in the military right now, so we'll come back and focus on that. Then we have lots of stories that we have posted on the website. Some of them have to do with COVID. Some of them have to do with what's happened in 2021. For Lathan's benefit, always have to put a Victor Davis Hanson piece up there. And so we will certainly get into those issues. And, of course, if you'd like to join us, since the calls are already coming in, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls and and get into a few more areas of controversy right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about charitable giving. Today, I wanted to follow up by challenging us as Christians to consider giving even more than we do. Perhaps the best book on that subject was written by David Green. It has the arresting title, Giving It All Away. He is the founder of Hobby Lobby and tells the story of his success and calls for Christians to give generously to churches and other ministries. He and the rest of his family have been on my radio program. We often talk about Hobby Lobby, the Museum of the Bible, and even their court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Most people know that Hobby Lobby is closed on Sunday. They may not also realize that their stores close earlier than other stores. That means they're only open 66 hours a week and compete with stores open many more hours. David Green did so that his employees can spend more time with their families. Hobby Lobby also pays its full-time employees well. Back in 2009, they raised the base pay to $10 an hour. The next year, they tacked on another $1. The next year, they did it again, and then again. That is another reason why the Green family values their employees. I asked David Green if he ever imagined that he would have to sue the federal government. The thought never crossed his mind, but he did so when the HHS mandate would have required them to provide abortifacients for their employees. Much of the book focuses on giving and challenges Christians to engage in the adventure of tithing. He has 3 principles they use and encourage others to implement them as well. First, set your criteria. What are you going to fund? Second, set your giving amount. Give the first fruits, not what is left over. And finally, set fire for the future. He also has thought quite a bit about how to make generosity generational. His book is certain to spark your interest and encourage you in giving. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kind of a year-end edition as well, because we're looking at the last day of 2021. And we have in studio with us Lathan Watts, by phone, Penna Dexter. And Penna, we're going to talk about some of the military cases, and our first call wants to get into that in just a minute. But especially, one of the issues, of course, is Navy SEALs, but the second one is Shields of Faith. A lot of these issues with the military come from one individual, Mickey Weinstein, and we've been talking about him on Point of View for many years, haven't we?
We have, and I actually met him one time because I interviewed him in person. And he actually pronounced, even though it's spelled like Mickey, he pronounces it Mikey. He's Mikey Weinstein, and he loves to go into the military. I think he did serve at one time, and find places where there are people worshiping God and who believe in Christ as their Savior, and accuse the military of promoting Christianity and doing that unconstitutionally. And he tries to do that in many ways. He's behind many of the cases that First Liberty Institute ends up winning. So, but he is just an annoyance. Well, it's more than an annoyance. It's a travesty that the freedom right now of certain members of our military is being curtailed because of these types of lawsuits.
Lathan, can you help us out with some of the cases you're dealing with right now?
Yeah, and Penna is right. You know, Mikey is basically just a gnat that we have to swat once in a while. I mean, that's really all it boils down to. I mean, I wish the guy would just find something better to do with his time, but he allows us to, go to court and win, establish precedents that protect religious liberty in the military. But Yeah, so I'll talk about a couple of the cases, but there was our Supreme Court case a couple of years ago on the Bladensburg Cross. There was a concurrence in that Supreme Court opinion written by Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito joined it. And Thomas in that concurrence said that, while I'm glad that, and I agree with the majority opinion that the Bladensburg Cross doesn't violate the Establishment Clause, and I'm glad we're getting rid of the Lemon Test, but while we were at it, what we should have also done is gotten rid of offended observers having status to bring lawsuits. And he pointed out in that concurrence that the Establishment Clause jurisprudence is the only area of the law where we allow this. And I hope maybe someday in my lifetime, we know there's 2 votes on the court because Thomas wrote it and Alito agreed with him. If we ever got to 5 votes on the court to get rid of offended observers having status to bring lawsuits like this, then Mikey would have to find a real job, because that is the ball game when it comes to the Establishment Clause. It's the only area of the law that we allow this, where Mikey just doesn't like something, and that somehow gives him status to challenge it in court, just because he's offended by the presence of religion in the military. Just like the Humanist Association were offended by the presence of a cross-shaped memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, they were allowed to go into court and try to tear it down. And it's the only area of the law that we allow this. Here in the Dallas area, there's certain areas of Dallas, if you drive a couple of miles, I would see probably half a dozen billboards that I find offensive. Okay, but if I walked into court in Dallas County to try to have those billboards torn down, I would get laughed out of court. Because in every other area of the law, you have to demonstrate that you've been harmed in some way. And just the mere presence of something that you don't like is not a legal harm to be remedied. And so my hope is that one day we will get a case that allows 2-3 other justices to consider that concurrence by Thomas and Alito. And if they sign on to that view that offended observers should not have standing to bring these lawsuits, like I said, Mikey will be out of a job. He'll have to go find some real work. But to the cases that we're talking about, because Mikey is the source of the Shields of Strength case. Shields of Strength was a ministry started many, many years ago by Kenny Vaughn and his wife. And what they do is they make basically replica dog tags. And on one side, it has the branch of service, their logo, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And on the other side, it has an inspirational scripture. And, the servicemen that want them order them from Shield of Strength, and he gives them, he sells them. He's donated probably as many as he's sold. I mean, he gave thousands away for free during the Gulf War and Operation Desert, all of these. He gives them for first responders and others. Mikey doesn't like the fact that the military, the official intellectual property of the military, which is, the Army logo or the Marine logo or whatever, is on the same piece of metal that a section of Scripture is on. And according to him, that somehow has established the official church of the United States of America in contradiction to the First Amendment. Now, we gave the military every opportunity to do the right thing. Once he contacted them, it was his complaint that the military then went to Kenny and said, we're not going to allow you to use our intellectual property, those logos, on your replica dog tags anymore. So we, for years, have been talking back and forth with DOD, trying to get them to do the right thing. And we finally got to the point where, okay, we have exhausted every opportunity for you to do what's right. So now we're going to go to court. And so we just recently, this month actually, filed our lawsuit. And so now we're going to have to litigate this.
Of course.
And it's all because of this gadfly named Mikey Weinstein.
Mikey Weinstein.
Mikey, if you don't like it, don't buy one. The people who don't like these, don't buy them. The people who do, purchase them with their own money. And it's nothing. The government isn't issuing these. They're not forcing any soldiers to wear these. They're not giving you your normal dog tag and here's the official Marine dog tag with our official scripture on it. No, it's a source of encouragement for people who want it. And I don't know where we got to this point in our country where, you don't like something, so I'm not allowed to do it. If you don't like it, don't buy it, Mikey. But that seems to be, a relic of the past these days. But I'm confident that we're going to win this lawsuit again, like we usually do when Mikey stirs up trouble. And Kenny will be able to provide these, to the people who want them.
Yes. Penna, one of the things we talked about just the other day is there are these stories that have not been well covered by the media. And of course, we understand that the secular media is not going to cover religious liberty victories. But if you weren't listening to Point of View, Penna, I would think you probably wouldn't know of the fact that they have a more than 90% win record there at First Liberty. And that's one of the reasons why I would encourage people to consider what they might do, not only to support Point of View to hear about it, but also to support First Liberty because they're engaged in winning so many battles.
I've always said year in and year out, and I've known Kelly for a long time, probably 25 years or more, and seen the growth of First Liberty Institute and the unbelievable impact for religious liberty over all those years, and much more in recent years nationwide. It's such a national treasure, and it's true. I mean, Fox News, to their credit, will do these stories. They will interview First Liberty attorneys and talk about the cases, and they make for absolutely fascinating media, so they're very smart to do it. But others will not. They will not cover it, and they don't know. And I'm so glad that Point of View just makes this opportunity for people who are regular listeners of our show to really be knowledgeable of all these cases,
yes,
the threats and also the victories. And, to have Lathan here today on the last day of the year to talk about these threats to our military. There's another one, too, with the vaccine mandates that's just egregious. And what's going to be happening to secure those liberties. I'm so glad that you're here, Lathan, today just to talk about it as everybody gears up for not only giving here at the end of the year, but also for what's going to happen next year.
Let's just, if we can, just before we take a break, I'll mention that we come back from the break. We've got a caller who wants to talk about the military and the chaplains. We haven't talked about the SEALs and a few others. But most importantly, as we're coming to a break, this is a great opportunity for you to actually join with us. This week, we've actually featured a couple of ministries that we think very highly of. Of course, one of those is First Liberty. And as I've said before, I want you to consider what you might do to support your local church, maybe support the radio station that carries this program. But also, as we are talking today about First Liberty and as well Point of View, we are encouraging you, as we are now to the very last day of 2021, to consider what you might do, even as we go to a break right now, how to support this ministry. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, you will recognize that we do have a blue button that you can click on that says Donate Now. The match is still on the table until it runs out, and so we have a dollar-for-dollar match. I know you do there at First Liberty, and we have a link there as well, so you can click on the picture of Lathan. That will take you where you need to go. And I hope that if you've been listening to this program for any length of time, even today's program, and learned some things you don't know, and maybe giving you some encouragement about some of these First Liberty cases, that's why we encourage you to go to the website, click on that button, and make your gift. If you would like to talk to someone off air, that's a different number. It's 800-347-5151. We'll come back with more right after this.
There is an opportunity for you today to light a candle that will burn brightly as we enter 2022 and for a long time to come. Thanks to a $117,000 matching grant, anything you give to Point of View today before midnight will be doubled. Amazing things happen when you give to Point of View. People hear the truth and become empowered to live it out. Point of View has been on the air for nearly 50 years. In that time, listeners have found Christ. They've started ministries. They've impacted untold millions of people. All because listeners like you give generously. When you light a candle with your generosity today, you have no idea how far that light will spread in 2022 and all the years to come. But I promise you, it will be further than you imagine. Remember, right now you can make twice the difference. The $117,000 matching grant ends at midnight, so please give now by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again with Weekend Edition. Lathan Watts in studio, Penna Dexter by phone. And just before we get back into some of the content, and we will continue talking about the military for a little bit and take a phone call or two, we will get to the issue of COVID for the reasons, number one, that record number of cases that took place, as well as a very good commentary, which those of you listening online can hear in about 15 minutes from Penna Dexter on the COVID-style family formation. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first of all, we are encouraging you to support this ministry, and some of our listeners want to encourage you to do that as well.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
I can't afford not to support you. Point of View gives me a voice, and I just appreciate you. And I've been here listening for years, so I thank you, and I do. Again, I said I can't afford not to support you, because I want you to keep going.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
My husband and I are your reporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
Again, encouraging you to support Point of View, and especially as we come to year-end, click on that button that says Donate Now at pointofview.net. Lathan Watts, Penna Dexter. Let me take a phone call real quickly here because we've been talking about military, and we'll go to Georgia, WLPE. Fran, I think you want to talk about some of the chaplains in the military. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My point is a little broader than that. But I heard that the atheists wanted an atheist chaplain to meet the spiritual needs of the military that are atheists, which, you know, one way or the other, I don't much care. But they want to be established as a religion. Then they want to disestablish any other religion. And to me, that's promoting atheism as the state religion.
What about that? It's almost like we're getting to the point of the establishment of atheism as the national religion. What about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what the law requires of the government when it comes to religion is neutrality.
Right.
So it cannot prefer one religion over another. It cannot prefer religion to non-religion, right? But if your religion is non-religion, I mean, it's just a semantic mess, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's oxymoronic to say, you know, people who don't believe in God have spiritual needs. It's a very interesting point, and it's an accurate one. If that's going to be the only, quote, religion that the military is going to recognize, then the military has violated the establishment clause because it has preferred one over another.
Well, and again, one of the things that you have actually a whole division of First Liberty that deals with the military, and you look at what has happened to chaplains, and this has been just incredible, some of the things they've had to face. We have already, of course, talking about the shields of strength, but then you have Navy chaplains and then Navy SEALs, and you have the vaccination issue. This is just almost seemed like there's, am I overstating it? It seems like a purge about people that have any kind of religious values?
I don't think that's overstating it at all. And I think if you go back to when the House Representatives Committee on January 6th started their investigation of, quote, extremism in the military, their definition of extremism would have included every Catholic and evangelical Christian in the military. And when they held their hearing, they had three witnesses, and Mike Berry, who heads our military division, was the only witness there. He was considered, quote, the minority witness.
Amazing.
Who advocated and basically told this committee that your definition of extremism would include every person of faith in the military. And what message are you sending to these people? That's the number one cited reason for why people join the military. When they poll the people who volunteer to serve in our military, the number one reason cited is religious belief. And so from a national security standpoint, you are looking at gutting the armed forces. By this definition, And so it is not overstating it to say that there are some in place in the Pentagon who would like to purge the military of all people of faith.
Wow.
And that's dangerous from a national security standpoint, just from a sheer numbers standpoint, but also the type of person you want serving in the military. These people, the essence of their job is to kill people and break things, right? I mean, that's what, as somebody, and I say this a lot on the air here when I'm here, I've never served in the military. I got plenty of friends and family that have. As someone who gratefully and humbly sleeps under the blanket of protection these men and women provide, I want them to be the most lethal force in the history of humankind. That's what I want them to do. Whatever makes them the absolute most lethal force in history, whatever makes them better at death and destruction, that should be the policy of the U.S. military. If you can convince me that having an all transsexual military will make us better at killing and defeating our enemies, then I'll be the first one to say, okay, that should be the policy. I don't think that's true, obviously. But this purge of people of faith out of the military is dangerous on many, many levels. From a national security standpoint, from what it means for religious liberty in the broader context of religious liberty in this country. And, our Navy SEALs case is a perfect example. We represent 35 Navy SEALs who have religious convictions that would prevent them from taking the mandated COVID vaccine by the DOD. Now, the Navy SEALs, every branch has its own special forces. The Navy SEALs are probably the most recognized and maybe the most revered elite warriors in all the world. And we're going to tell these 35 people your service is no longer required because you have a religious conviction about this vaccine. It's wrong on so many levels. From a preparedness standpoint, from a religious liberty standpoint, these are the best of the best, and these are this elite group of people that make us the best military in the world, and we should be doing everything we can to accommodate, to make them better, to give them the tools that they need. And religious faith is essential to that. And yet, here we have the DOD telling these elite special forces that they're going to be potentially court-martialed, kicked out of the military, possibly dishonorably discharged, and they've even been threatened with, we're going to sue you individually to recoup the money the DOD spent training you to become a SEAL, which is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars per SEAL. So it's not just their career that's on the line, it's their own personal finances. And it's a threat, as I said before, on many, many levels. So it's why this case is so important. We filed it. We had our first hearing. The hearing went very well. If there's time, we can talk a little bit more about that, but I'm confident we're going to win that. And when we do, that will not only just protect these 35 Navy SEALs, it will establish a precedent that's going to protect everybody in the military.
Penn, I was just thinking that we should be very grateful that there is a Mike Berry and that there's a military wing to the First Liberty, because I think some of the attacks coming against the military are almost unprecedented and are another reason why people should be in prayer about this and support the organization.
Well, first of all, it just defies common sense that the military would want to get rid of Christians. That, some of the elites in the military would be taking these actions to squeeze out Christians, because it's Christians that serve. It's Christian families that raise young kids who grow up to serve in the military because they have sort of a selfless attitude, and they want to, some greater cause is more important to them than their own safety. So they're willing to put their lives on the line. So you have this type of people who are often the ones who are serving. So, I mean, if you really did squeeze out and didn't have the protections of First Liberty, defending the rights of members of the military to practice their religion, if you didn't have that, you would have a military that would be diminishing in size and quality. So, that, it just makes me scratch my head. It's just crazy that the military is pursuing this policy right now. But yes, Kerby, First Liberty Institute has its own division led by Mike Berry. And, if it weren't there, I mean, I know that you would have other groups across the country defending the rights of the military, but it's coordinated, it's well thought out, and it's very, very effective. So, yes, worth supporting for certain.
When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of COVID as well. Penna Dexter's commentary, which you can hear right now if you happen to be online, the COVID-style family formation. We have a call about that issue as well, which we will take. And, of course, as you might see, if you go down the list here, I think it's our fourth article, talks about the fact that the United States set a world record yesterday for the number of new COVID cases. And we'll try to get into some of those issues because that has been a major news story this year, and we're still learning more about it every single day. Let's take a break. We will continue our conversation. We'll take some phone calls as well. All that coming up right after these messages.
New research on family life shows that COVID-19 has exacerbated a growing divide in family formation, with higher income, better educated Americans more interested in getting married and having children than those with less education and lower incomes. Marriage rates are falling. Birth and fertility rates are at record lows. The fertility rate is only about 1.7 children per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. All kinds of problems result from this decline in family formation, many of them economic. But New York Times columnist Russ Douthat says most research portends a potentially disastrous long-term cost for the poor and least educated Americans, for whom singlehood and isolation define middle and old age. The pandemic contributed to these trends. Dating became more difficult when institutions where relationships often form, churches, colleges, and community organizations, closed or moved online. Russ Douthat warns that these institutions likely won't resume the robust role they once played in matchmaking. Now, he writes, they're pushing people more and more into virtual spaces and virtual marriage markets that, on the evidence we have, aren't doing a particularly good job of pairing men and women off. The pandemic fueled government stimulus spending that allowed many Americans to delay their return to work. This had the undesirable effect of encouraging more working-class men to drop out of the workforce. The research shows more women than men are now returning to church, but more men than women are finding themselves in a lifestyle labeled neat, not in education, employment, or training, and not getting married or starting families. There's talk of a government-provided guaranteed income to relieve this downward pressure on the desire to form families. But would this alleviate what Russ Douthat described as the family unfriendliness of men making low annual incomes? Would it change the minds of more than half of single men making less than $50,000 per year who report they don't want to have children? Probably not. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Lathan Watts, and by phone, Penna Dexter. Let's take a phone call. Jeannie in Florida, I think you wanted to talk about the vaccine requirements, so you have the floor.
I really think all of this is a farce. If the only way they're going to get me to take it is shoot me, and I'm not going to do that. So, but the point I'm trying to make is they're trying very desperately to make every human being in the United States take this vaccine. And yet they're letting in all of the people that want to come into our country, come in without being vaccinated, which means they're trying to mark all of those that are in the United States with vaccines and let everybody else that wants to come in so that they can use them as the majority of people to vote their way of thinking. Something about this thing.
Well, what about this? You got Navy SEALs who might be some of the healthiest people I've ever met in my life. Have you ever met a Navy SEAL? And we're saying, well, it'd just really be terrible if they don't get the vaccine. And then we have 2 million people crossing the border. What? I mean, help me figure that out. I can't figure it out.
Nor can I. And I think Jeannie raises a good point, but also demonstrates like a common mistake that most of us make, in that you're using common sense and logic trying to evaluate government policy. And the first thing you should do if you're discussing government policy is abandon all hope of logic and or common sense. So I agree with you.
Sad commentary.
That it does not make any sense to force it on all of us. But then a group of people who you can't even identify, who are just coming over the border day in, day out. Oh yeah, no requirements for them. I mean, that makes zero sense whatsoever. I think we can all probably agree, and hindsight is always 20/20, that this issue was politicized from day one, and the so-called experts seem to have been making it up as they go along, day in and day out. I think there is an instinct on the part of people who are in government that there's this do something, even if it is wrong, right? Like this drive to be able to show that you're doing something about it. I've said probably on air a few times that I think principled inaction is the rarest commodity in all of politics. And knowing now, what we do know, and looking back, I think if we had focused all of our government effort on treatment versus vaccination, we would likely be in a much, much better scenario right now. If we had focused all the money and all the research and all the time and all the effort on what is the best way to treat this virus versus coming up with a vaccine and then forcing it on everybody, we'd likely be better off. If we knew what the absolute best treatment that gives you the best chance of survival, assuming we're all going to get it, then we'd probably be in a much better place, both from a physical standpoint and from rights and liberties standpoint, to just focus the effort on here's the best way to treat this and make that available to everybody who comes down with the virus.
Penna, the first article here is about the fact that yesterday the United States set a world record for the most number of cases. Nobody saw that coming, not even the President of the United States, matter of fact, including the President of the United States. And so we find ourselves right now with some real questions about what it's going to be like in 2022.
Well, I don't, you say nobody saw that coming, but on this, for instance, the Omicron virus that's out there now and everybody's getting, there was the experience of South Africa, which just precedes us, and you've seen the spike, and then you've seen it go over the top and start back down in South Africa. So we could learn from that, and we should be watching these because, the vaccine obviously is not the answer, because people that are vaccinated are now getting COVID again.
Exactly.
And it almost seems like they never got vaccinated. But I think what could have been and what was not, maybe a little bit, the idea of testing. We've always known that testing was important. And if you want to give the American people the opportunity to help protect themselves and make good decisions as far as the pandemic goes, get them access to a lot of testing so that they can see, should I go out today? Should I go be with people today, or should I not? Well, I have a test here that I bought at the drugstore, or I can run down the street and get a rapid test, and I can make a good decision for my own self, my coworkers, my family, and the culture at large. But we don't seem to have put as much thought or resources into that, and right now, people can't even get the tests that they want. I mean, the lines here in Texas, you cannot believe the lines of traffic of people trying to get a rapid test because of the surge of the virus. Yes. And this could have been prepared for. It really could have. We've had this with us long enough that we should have a lot more testing capability.
Let's, if we can, just before we get back to some of these topics, which we'll cover in the next hour, I took the initiative to bring the president of Point of View into the studio here, Warren Kelly. And certainly, as we are coming to year end, I want to know how we were doing. We have a match on the table, and we've had a number of people that have given, but how are we standing right now?
We have had a large number of people that have given, and we're very grateful for each and every one of those gifts. Without you, we're not here, and you're critical to the important work that this ministry is doing. But we are, at this point, just under $20,000 short of meeting our match.
Okay.
So we've got a good ways to go. We've come a long ways, but today is the last day, and this is getting tight.
And so, again, we've said that some of you, and I've seen this every time we've done a truth team where people wait to the last day. And so, Penna, what would you say to individuals that have said, well, I've been listening to Point of View for a long time, but I really am not sure you really need our funds, and I think you can do well without me. What would you say?
Well, one thing I'd say is, since there's a match on the table, I always say this: don't leave money on the table. You've got a match that we have to meet by the end of the program today, and it's actually double what you would be giving. And so I would say this is just for that reason alone, it's a good time to do it. But there are certainly many other reasons. And, you know, this theme this week, for those that have been getting emails from Point of View, is being a light. And you can be a light in ways that, you know, you could not do, but Point of View can do, and you can by helping us. And so we're asking today, here at the end of the year, I mean, this is just a great moment, not only to fund Point of View, to get our message out, to get the message out of freedom, to help all the people that end up being guests on our program to get their messages out. It's a perfect time to do that, and to do it here at the end of the year with the match, and also just to kind of inspire the ministry to go out and make bigger plans for next year.
Warren, I think I'll bring you in an hour from now so we can kind of see how we're doing as well. But let me just encourage, as Penna just said, that if you go to the website, pointofview.net, the first thing you'll notice is there's a candle, then another candle, and that is how one light lights another. And all of us probably at one time or another have been in a candlelight service or something like that, where we see that you can light up a room when one candle then leads to another candle to another. And we want you to be a light in your community. That can be in your family for sure, it can be in your church for sure, but even in your community, you're going to be able to reach people in your sphere of influence that we will never be able to reach, but we want to equip you to be able to do that. We also want to reach out to people that might just be tuning in, zipping down the dial and say, what is this program? And they start listening. We've heard of individuals that have become Christians or gotten involved in doing salt and light in their own community. So again, as we go to the break right now, this is a perfect time to go to the website, pointofview.net. As you heard Warren Kelly say, we still have a match on the table, a dollar for dollar match. $50 becomes $100, $100 becomes $200. Click on that button that says donate now, or you might want to talk to someone, and one of our Point of View staff will take a phone call at 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. We'll be back right after this.
There is an opportunity for you today to light a candle that will burn brightly as we enter 2022 and for a long time to come. Thanks to a $117,000 matching grant, anything you give to Point of View today before midnight will be doubled. Amazing things happen when you give to Point of View. People hear the truth and become empowered to live it out. Point of View has been on the air for nearly 50 years. In that time, listeners have found Christ. They've started ministries. They've impacted untold millions of people. All because listeners like you give generously. When you light a candle with your generosity today, you have no idea how far that light will spread in 2022 and all the years to come. But I promise you, it will be further than you imagine. Remember, right now you can make twice the difference. The $117,000 matching grant ends at midnight, so please give now by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is weekend edition, kind of year-in edition as well. And one of the articles we have here is Conformity Crack-Up of 2021. It's a look back over some of the stories here where there was a consensus that turned out to be incorrect about the origin of the COVID virus, about the lockdowns, about the issue of crime and police, and much more. Matter of fact, one of our callers wants to talk about that in just a minute. But again, if you have not had a chance to look at some of these articles, this one reminds us that sometimes just because you have a political media consensus, it's quite possible that that consensus could be wrong. And that's where you need to use common sense. And I think Lathan just illustrated the fact that sometimes you're making a mistake of assuming there's common sense. Lathan Watts in studio with us, Penna Dexter by phone. And before we get to those phone calls, let me go around the round table with the two of you, because this particular piece is really from the editors of the Wall Street Journal, in which they remind us that sometimes if you break the consensus, and they use as an example James Bennett, who lost his job at the New York Times for daring to put on an op-ed page a piece by the Republican Senator Tom Cotton talking about how to control the riots. And this one, Lathan, I'll come to you first, talks about the consensus about, we're really not sure the virus came from the Wuhan Institute for Virology. The lockdowns really will stop COVID-19. How'd that work out for you? Supply side of the economy doesn't matter. We have the Steele dossier and Russian collusion. And, you know, it doesn't matter how much we vilify the police or talk about defunding the police, it won't affect crime. These didn't really do so well in terms of the news cycle, did they?
No, you know, from the file of entirely predictable consequences. Yeah, you know, I tell my kids all the time, you know, whatever the initial reports are on anything, if there's a breaking news story, whatever comes after the words that you hear the guy on TV or radio or whatever, initial reports indicate that, fill in the blank, they're almost always wrong.
Yes.
Almost always. Always wait. The initial reports are almost always wrong, because there is such a rush to be first, because we live in a 24-hour news cycle. Everybody's out there trying to break news all the time, and people don't do enough homework, frankly, before they start reporting on things. And so not only, you know, in all the stories that you mentioned, not only were the initial reports wrong, they just stuck with it. Mm-hmm. Even when, you know, all
doubled
evidence,
down on it.
All evidence to the contrary, they just kept reinforcing it over and over and over again. And anyone who dared to point this out was like the emperor has no clothes, right? Somebody finally stands up and says, that's not right. They were then banished from the conversation.
Yep. Deplatformed, all sorts of things.
Right.
And Penna, I'd like to get your comments, because, you know, one of the things we're making available right now on our Take Action item is a free booklet on media bias. So some of it has to do with the rush to judgment. Some of it has to do with the fact that, well, I would hope people would be listening to Point of View. We are looking at this from more of a biblical point of view. And if you start with a secular, liberal, progressive point of view, oftentimes you're going to miss very important parts of the story, aren't you?
Yes, and, you know, the media bias and also the media forced conformity, which is what this piece in the Wall Street Journal is about. I think the story actually sums up the year. I mean, if we're talking on a program where we're covering, you know, the the year as a whole, this really sums it up, because we've had stories reported, maybe just the last couple of years, we've had these stories reported, and if you go outside the bounds of what the media, the mainstream media, wants to say about it, you're pretty much canceled, like James Bennett was at the New York Times. And then, it takes a long time. Sometimes they'll all of a sudden break through and start thinking about how something might be true. And the Wuhan virology lab story is a case in point, because way back when COVID first came upon the world, I mean, most thinking people, considered the possibility that the virus could have been released by that lab, which is right there in Wuhan, China. But it was just smashed. The story was squelched. The quote unquote experts in the United States would not allow it out or to be discussed, and the media just went along. And as Lathan says, that just says something about our media, that they're not performing the function that they should be performing. And so this consensus, just won the day. Once in a while, after a long time, you'll get the real story coming out. But even then, you get certain parts of the media that will not tell the truth, and that's the problem. We're truth challenged right now, and we've got either conformity or truth. And I think Point of View just performs such a crucial function there, because people can come in and listen, and they can hear sometimes more than one side of things, and different guests that will present different views. But then, you can actually discern truth if you have all the facts. And when you've got people covering up half or three-quarters of the facts, you're never going to get the truth.
Let's take some phone calls. We'll head up to Alaska, KJNP. And Dale, I think you have a good question about what happened in the Wuhan lab.
Yeah, well, it's not so much as what happened, but what's happening right now. That's what I'm curious. I'm thinking that they might be working on China bug number 2 or number 3 or whatever number it is. So what are they making these killer viruses for anyway?
Well, again, the question I think a lot of people have been having right now is, why hasn't there been some kind of prosecution? One of the very good pieces that I was going to post today, but didn't get around to it, by Glenn Reynolds, how we need to make our public health authorities accountable for some of their misstatements and lies. At first, we didn't know what we know, but we know a lot more. And in that second page, it points out that you get this blanket denial from Dr. Anthony Fauci that there was no gain-of-function research, and yet you can see that as far as we can determine, it was indeed funded by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, headed by one Dr. Anthony Fauci. And so we recognize that justice is never perfect in America, but it's just becoming more and more frustrating that we should figure out some way, I would think, Lathan, to try to stop these kinds of experiments, because I do believe that particular institute, whether intentionally or accidentally, unleashed this virus on the world.
Absolutely. And there's, gain of function research is government speak for weaponization.
Right.
That's actually what it is when you take a virus like that and turn it into a weapon. That's what gain of function means, is the weaponizing of a virus. That's what this lab was studying. And at the very least, we shouldn't be paying for the virus that is unleashed upon us, whether or not it was unleashed intentionally or not. And Fauci was caught in that lie. And the piece that you pointed out, raises this, that he's never once been held accountable for it. And to Penna's point about, and let me just put in a plug for Point of View too, that you hear things here that you won't hear elsewhere. Even in some of the conservative media that covers our cases, they never get around to telling you that we won. And you'll hear that here.
Good to know you. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about charitable giving. Today, I wanted to follow up by challenging us as Christians to consider giving even more than we do. Perhaps the best book on that subject was written by David Green. It has the arresting title, Giving It All Away. He is the founder of Hobby Lobby and tells the story of his success and calls for Christians to give generously to churches and other ministries. He and the rest of his family have been on my radio program. We often talk about Hobby Lobby, the Museum of the Bible, and even their court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Most people know that Hobby Lobby is closed on Sunday. They may not also realize that their stores close earlier than other stores. That means they're only open 66 hours a week and compete with stores open many more hours. David Green did so that his employees can spend more time with their families. Hobby Lobby also pays its full-time employees well. Back in 2009, they raised the base pay to $10 an hour. The next year, they tacked on another $1. The next year, they did it again, and then again. That is another reason why the Green family values their employees. I asked David Green if he ever imagined that he would have to sue the federal government. The thought never crossed his mind, but he did so when the HHS mandate would have required them to provide abortifacients for their employees. Much of the book focuses on giving and challenges Christians to engage in the adventure of tithing. He has 3 principles they use and encourage others to implement them as well. First, set your criteria. What are you going to fund? Second, set your giving amount. Give the first fruits, not what is left over. And finally, set fire for the future. He also has thought quite a bit about how to make generosity generational. His book is certain to spark your interest and encourage you in giving. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Lathan Watts and, of course, Penna Dexter with us. And one of the articles, The Conformity Crack-Up of 2021, just to remind us, and since we are, of course, talking at the moment about COVID-19 and the Wuhan Institute for Virology, you would think after all that has transpired that then we would boycott the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Beijing. You would assume that we would want to call into question the neutrality of the World Health Organization. You might even want to go to The Hague and really charge China with the misuse of various kinds of biochemical weapons and the rest. And so far, I haven't noticed any of that taking place.
Yeah, absolutely none. We don't know whether or not this was done accidentally or on purpose. If it was done on purpose, that's an act of war, plain and simple. And that has very large geopolitical consequences. And maybe our government doesn't want to know that because those are severe consequences that must be dealt with.
Right.
But if, at the very least, even if it was accidental, the Chinese Communist Party learned from this how to wreck the American economy.
Yes.
Because they saw how we dealt with it, and we did it to ourselves. And if your goal as China is to become the world's reserve currency, then you have to wreck the American economy. You have to devalue the dollar if you want the yuan to become the world's reserve currency. Well, we showed them what we would do to ourselves with COVID. And so to the last caller, I think Dale in Alaska brought this up. What are they working on next?
Yeah.
Whether or not this was intentional or not, I guarantee you they learned some valuable lessons. And we need to learn those lessons and be prepared for whatever they're working on next. And at the very least, stop giving them the money to do it. So, there's.
You said something a couple of weeks ago that if you were advising somebody to run in the Republican primary, what you would suggest in light of what Dale just said.
Yeah. I've worked in politics for a long time, and I'm, kind of an observer and kind of a political dork, and to be clear, nobody is asking for my advice on how to run for president. But if I were advising somebody who was going to run for president on the GOP side, I would tell him or her, you want to win the primary, here's how you do it. You make this announcement when you announce you're running for president. You make this announcement and you make it early, and you be the first person to say this. On day one, if I'm elected president, I will fire Anthony Fauci.
Incredible.
You will win the primary. I promise you. I can't guarantee you'd win the general, but you would win the GOP primary on that promise alone. Because this guy, he's become a caricature of himself. And I think if there's any bright side to all of this, is I think most Americans don't pay any attention to what this guy says anymore. It's just the political media complex that we've just been talking about that has put this guy on a pedestal and just recirculates whatever he says today, which may be 180 off of what he said yesterday. But we have to learn the lessons, and some of them are hard lessons, but they've got to be learned. They got to be implemented to avoid going through any of this nonsense again.
Penna, let me come to you because, first of all, you may want to comment about that, but also we have your commentary today in which we've talked about the impact of COVID-19, and we've seen the lockdowns and the impact that that's had on kids. We've seen, of course, the impact it's had on the economy. I think it, in some respects, is the reason why inflation is so high. But you have another commentary as well about just even the impact it had on family life. Can you speak to those issues?
Yes. Let me go back and just speak to China for 1 minute, because it's just unbelievable that we haven't punished China, or at least curtailed our positive dealings with them. Because even if this was an accidental release from the Wuhan lab, and as you mentioned, I mean, I just got this huge list on a piece of paper of all the repercussions of COVID to the country. But you have to remember back in the early days of the pandemic that they allowed people out of the country. They knew in Wuhan that this was out there and it was spreading. And they didn't say anything. And then they allowed people to fly out of the airports and come all over the world. And they didn't have to do that. They could have been honest. We've got a threat. And if they were an honest dealing nation that cared about the rest of the world, they would have locked down the airports and kept people from going out, at least did some really radical screening of people that would leave that area of China. They didn't do it. And that part of it, I mean, if you give them the benefit of the doubt that this was an accident, wasn't done on purpose and all of that, they did not do the normal type of precautions that other free countries would have done. So that, to me, it's just amazing when I think back and I think the havoc that's been wreaked because of it. But yes, and one of those pieces of havoc that's been foisted on the United States is just some changes on family life that have been studied recently. And I did one commentary a couple of weeks ago on it, and my commentary this week is on it also, that all this new research on family life that's and how COVID-19 has changed it. A lot of the trends that we already had going on before COVID have just been exacerbated by this. And one of the main pieces of information you can glean from these studies is that higher income, better educated Americans are more interested in getting married and having children than those with less education and with lower incomes. And you're seeing marriage rates. Some people would have said, well, okay, everybody's cocooning, maybe marriage rates are going to go back up. No, they're falling. And birth and fertility rates are way down. And that's really devastating for our society. You get all kinds of problems from that. And we could have a potentially disastrous long-term cost for this, especially for the poorest and least educated Americans. And so, it's really sad that emphasis on marriage and family in the country is less and less all the time. It's really God's plan. We can talk about it more later, but but unfortunately, marriage and child rearing are down, and we need to make sure, and everybody recognizes that's a problem, but our solutions also need to be the right ones and not the wrong ones.
Well, again, that piece is on the website, and it's, again, as you support Point of View, you're not only getting the broadcast every day, the videos, but also these commentaries. But I thought, once again, we would bring Warren Kelly in, see how we are doing. And how have we been doing the last couple of days?
This is the most critical time of the year for giving for us. The last 3 days of the year especially. In the last 2 days, we have been down about 30% over what we were this time last year. So that's a little bit concerning. The month as a whole has been pretty good, but the last couple of days, the trend has been downward. We have seen some giving in the last few minutes after I was in a little bit ago, and so we're down now to about $14,000 left on the match. But we also still have about $83,000 that we need to finish out the year with a good, strong financial footing to be able to be in the place we need to be going into the new year.
Yes. So again, people can give to the ministry, and as we were just mentioned a minute ago, you get my commentaries every day if you sign up, Monday through Friday. You get Penna Dexter's on Saturday. Of course, we've posted it there right now. And if you wonder about the impact of COVID-19 on families, there it is. And Warren, again, just talk about this, because we are in the midst of broadcasting all over the country. We have some technology that allows us to do this more efficiently. And we've had to make a few investments, and those are important as well, aren't they?
We have. There have been some investments we've had to make in the infrastructure for the ministry for equipment and things over the last year, and those are not cheap. So we are really looking to you to help us get into the new year very strong financial footing so that we can take on the things that all of the issues that Kerby faces every day.
Let's again mention we're coming to a break, and some of you might say, well, I don't want to miss any of the conversation, and certainly I never want to miss anything that Lathan or Penna has to say or other guests. And so during this break would be a perfect time to go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can be going to the website while you're listening to us. Now, some of us men around the table aren't so good at multitasking, but if you can do that, that works out pretty well.
Amen.
And if you go to that website, you will certainly see that there is an opportunity still. There's matches still on the table, and it sounds like it's about ready to run out. So a good opportunity for you to get that dollar-for-dollar match by clicking on that button that says donate. I did mention the phone call, probably easier for you to go to the website, but once we go off the air, which is going to be about a half an hour from now, that will be the last broadcast of 2021, and you're saying, well, what do I do next? Well, you can still go to the website, but we do occasionally have people answering those phones, 800-347-5151. But let me point you to the website. I think most of us are certainly computer savvy enough now to figure out how to make a donation there. But if you need to talk to someone, of course, I did give that number, 800-347-5151. We do have the match on the table. We also encourage you to, as you go there, we have a take action item where you can get a free copy of our media bias booklet. Of course, Penna Dexter's commentary there, COVID-style family formation, and much, much more. So it's just a reminder that you're supporting not only the radio program, but all the other resources we want to put in your hands so you can light a lamp. Again, the website is pointofview.net. We need to hear from a few more of you, and we will take a break and come back with more right after this.
There is an opportunity for you today to light a candle that will burn brightly as we enter 2022 and for a long time to come. Thanks to a $117,000 matching grant, anything you give to Point of View today before midnight will be doubled. Amazing things happen when you give to Point of View. People hear the truth and become empowered to live it out. Point of View has been on the air for nearly 50 years. In that time, listeners have found Christ. They've started ministries. They've impacted untold millions of people. All because listeners like you give generously. When you light a candle with your generosity today, you have no idea how far that light will spread in 2022 and all the years to come. But I promise you, it will be further than you imagine. Remember, right now you can make twice the difference. The $117,000 matching grant ends at midnight, so please give now by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you would like to join with us, 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back and listen. We have Lathan Watts in studio, Penna Dexter by phone, and Warren Kelly wanted me to remind you that this is the last day for the match. I think that's obvious, but sometimes you have to state the obvious, especially in the culture we're going to be talking about in just a minute. And, of course, it's available for about a half an hour, although I think it'll still be going on afterwards. But at that point, you can go online or you can call that number. And I thought it would be about time to get to Victor Davis Hanson. We had him on recently with his book. And this one, both Lathan and Penna, is kind of looking at the past. You know, we've been looking for the last year, but it's good to sometimes put that in perspective. And just a couple of key quotes. I would encourage you to read it in its entirety, in which he says, critics assume that their own judgmental generation is morally superior to the past, so they use their own standards to condemn those who obviously can't react to it. And yet he begins to wonder, really, if we go look in the future, will our grandchildren someday wonder why we dumped $30 trillion in national debt on them? Are we proud that the most standardized test of student knowledge and achievement continue to decline despite record investments in education? And our generation, he talks about infrastructure nonstop. But when was the last time it built anything comparable to Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, the California Water Project, much less put a man on the moon? And it's a reminder that there is almost a narcissistic belief that we are morally superior right now, and we are the generation that everybody has been looking forward to. And yet educational standards seem to be dropping precipitously. What about this, Lathan?
Well, I'm admittedly a Victor Davis Hanson fanboy. Okay. I've had the privilege of being around him a few times and chatting with him a little bit because of some work I do with National Review. And I doubt he could pick me out of a lineup, but it was a very, very big deal for me to meet him and talk with him a little bit. And this piece is fantastic. Everybody should read it. Frankly, you should read everything this man writes. He's a national treasure. He just relentlessly tells the truth. And as this piece points out, and as you just mentioned, it is the ultimate appeal of the progressive movement. Appeals to the oldest sin in the book, which is pride, right? The progressive movement says whatever time period you're living in, whether you're Woodrow Wilson at the zenith of American progressivism in the early 1900s, or whether you're the pink-haired college campus liberal today, it tells you that you are the absolute pinnacle of human progress. That is the essential selling point of progressive ideology, that we're constantly making progress. So whatever time period you're in, if you're a progressive, you're at the pinnacle of human achievement. It appeals to the oldest sin in the book, pride. And what this piece points out is how misplaced that pride is, that all of these people who look back and judge, look down on, people of the past with their, misplaced sense of moral superiority. And it basically asks them to justify it. Okay, you think you're better than these folks? What has your generation done? And he just goes throughout history, just as you pointed out, whether it's the Hoover Dam, whether it's winning World War II, whether it's, would this generation have called all the troops home from World War I because the Spanish flu broke out? This is the ultimate get off my lawn piece by Victor Davis Hanson, and nobody is better at it, and I love him for it, and everybody should read everything this guy writes. I got his book for Christmas, as I requested on air here once, and it's fantastic, called The Dying Citizen. Would encourage everybody to read that. It's a masterpiece.
We did an interview with him, in case you'd like to listen to it before you get the book, but Penna, let me come to you, because I know that you're familiar with Victor Davis Hanson, and I certainly appreciate his analysis of history, also his critique of what is happening in the what used to be Golden State of California.
Right. It's interesting. I recently lost my father. He went home to be with the Lord at 94, and he loved Victor Davis Hanson. And my dad was from the Central Coast of California. Victor Davis Hanson's from the Central Valley of California, the kind of the farming community, still kind of salt of the earth area there. And,
he still operates his farm. His farm actually he's still a farmer.
He's still a farmer, and yet he has time to write all these treasures for us to appreciate. I mean, he's an amazing man. But, some people who studied the virtues and thinking about the virtue of piety, I always, I was kind of, until I studied it, didn't realize that it really has to do with appreciating the contributions of people who came before you. And there's a sense of humility in that. And we've obviously, and his whole article really supports the idea that we've lost that. We've really lost the piety. And we're renaming, as he says, we're renaming things, we're toppling statues, we're totally disrespecting and dissing things that have been the foundation of our country. One of those he mentions is meritocracy. I mean, all of a sudden, everything else, other things like what tribe you're in, what race you are going to be the reason that you're elevated, not because you've actually accomplished something. And I think that, we need to look back to the past. I mean, yes, there are things that weren't perfect in the past or that were bad, and you apologize for those or you try to correct those. But as the progressive movement is doing now to completely turn its back on the past, not only is that damaging to the country, because then you don't get any of the benefit of our history, and you begin to change history, and that's very dangerous, as we've seen in many communist and totalitarian countries. But you also lose out on a lot of benefit because there's so much we can learn from our history and from others that have come before.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk about the reverse of that, and it's the cancel culture. And I've got a great illustration here. The other day, the British newspaper, The Guardian, asked the various individuals, through our readers, to pick who they think is the 2021 Person of the Year. And the person that garnered the most number of votes was J.K. Rowling. And immediately then you notice that there was a message on the voting form. This form has been deactivated and is closed to any further submissions. Penna, let me come back to you for just a minute. Whether you like Harry Potter books or not, this woman has done a great deal. But when she stepped off the reservation as a feminist to point out that women are women and men are men, that was enough for The Guardian to say, we certainly cannot allow somebody like J.K. Rowling to be Person of the Year in 2021. Your thoughts?
That's pretty sad. J.K. Rowling, because of her stature, because of her success in life with Harry Potter and her writing, she was able to come out and say things that are really truth, that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And also because she's not a conservative. As a matter of fact, she's more of a feminist. And this whole cancel culture, this whole transgender agenda has done much damage to the gains that the feminist movement achieved over many decades. And so that was a lot of her message. And even that message that the left supported, they are now rejecting in favor of this ridiculous anti-science, I think something that's eventually going to be, I don't think that the trans agenda is going to last, because it's obvious to your own two eyes that men are men and women are women. But she just says what's obvious, and right now we're in such a terrible state in the culture, not only in America but Europe, that we can't even allow someone to tell the truth.
Yeah, and this demonstrates, The Guardian puts this poll up, people vote, Then they take the poll down. And I forget if it was Lenin or Stalin. It was one of those communists who said, I don't care who votes. I care who counts the votes.
Stalin, yeah.
And and this is exactly, a perfect illustration of that. Well, we'll let the people vote on who Person of the Year is. Well, you picked the wrong person, so we're not going to do that anymore. It is demonstrating absurdity by being absurd.
Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, I would like everybody to maybe put on their prognosticators, prognosticator, got the wrong word.
Easy for you
hat,
to say.
and really just get a sense of what is going to happen in 2022. But in particular, really want to look at the issue of the elections. I know that you have worked on various senatorial campaigns, governor's campaigns. Penn and I have certainly supported various individuals and wonder what is going to happen in 2022, because in some respects, maybe that gives people a sense of hope that maybe we're going to get to a point where we're actually going to say, no, there really are only two genders, male and female. There really is right and wrong. There really are good and bad policies, and we don't need to keep spending when we don't have money. A lot of common sense. We'll see if it's breaking out right after this.
New research on family life shows that COVID-19 has exacerbated a growing divide in family formation, with higher income, better educated Americans more interested in getting married and having children than those with less education and lower incomes. Marriage rates are falling. Birth and fertility rates are at record lows. The fertility rate is only about 1.7 children per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. All kinds of problems result from this decline in family formation, many of them economic. But New York Times columnist Russ Douthit says most research portends a potentially disastrous long-term cost for the poor and least educated Americans, for whom singlehood and isolation define middle and old age. The pandemic contributed to these trends. Dating became more difficult when institutions where relationships often form, churches, colleges, and community organizations, closed or moved online. Russ Douthit warns that these institutions likely won't resume the robust role they once played in matchmaking. Now, he writes, they're pushing people more and more into virtual spaces and virtual marriage markets that, on the evidence we have, aren't doing a particularly good job of pairing men and women off. The pandemic fueled government stimulus spending that allowed many Americans to delay their return to work. This had the undesirable effect of encouraging more working-class men to drop out of the workforce. The research shows more women than men are now returning to church, but more men than women are finding themselves in a lifestyle labeled neat, not in education, employment, or training, and not getting married or starting families. There's talk of a government-provided guaranteed income to relieve this downward pressure on the desire to form families. But would this alleviate what Ross Douthit described as the family unfriendliness of men making low annual incomes? Would it change the minds of more than half of single men making less than $50,000 per year who report they don't want to have children? Probably not. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me just mention that even as we go off the air in just a few minutes, you are certainly able to still go to the website, pointofview.net, or go to the pledge line number, 800-347-5151. But I thought we'd look ahead for just a little bit. We're about ready to get into 2022. Obviously, COVID will be with us, but let me give you some hope. It turns out that there are two studies, one from the Netherlands, another one from South Africa. I'll just mention the Dutch study, in which they're saying now that these T cells, you might say, what is a T cell? Well, those are a type of white blood cell. They're kind of a secondary line of defense. You don't have to know all of that, but antibodies will block an infection. T cells will actually attack and kill those. And it turns out, as best we can determine, that people that have been vaccinated actually are going to be able to have a residual T cell effectiveness. The problem with some of the antibodies is they tend to fade over time. They don't have what's called durability, but it does appear that this maybe is why we see Omicron infections among the vaccinated don't seem to be as severe and don't attack the lungs the way some of the other variants do. So even when we recognize that we're going to still have crime, we're still going to have inflation, still going to have COVID, that is certainly at least a little bit of an encouragement. But I thought I'd go around the table because, first of all, Lathan, you've worked on some political campaigns, and again, we'll use the same line that you use so often, the ability of certain parties, in particular the Republican Party, to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. But at the same time, if I see the trends do not look very good for Democrats, and the trends do not look good for Joe Biden at this time next year, or if he's replaced, Kamala Harris or whoever, what happens, to assume that as they go into 2023 that they will have a Democratic majority in the House and Senate.
Yeah, I mean, historically, the first midterm after a presidential election, the party out of power picks up seats. That's the general trend, with a few exceptions. George W. Bush actually picked up seats after 9/11. But the general trend is the party out of power picks up seats. The R's don't really have to pick up that many. They need a +1 basically in the Senate to get control of the Senate. They need about a +6 to take control of the House. Just as you said, and I say often, there's nobody better at forming circular firing squads than Republicans. But there's also nobody better at overreaching than the Democrat Party, and they've done it again. You had a president narrowly elected. You had barely a majority in the House. You need the vice president to break a tie in the Senate. And if Biden had been humble about that and recognized that, and even told his own supporters that, he could have maybe been a little bit more reasonable in what he was trying to get done, and maybe could have got some things done. Instead, he came in like FDR on steroids, and he's lost. He can't point to a single thing, really, that he said he was going to do that he accomplished, at 100% effectiveness. And so, predictions are dangerous, but I do think the R's will take back the House. I do think the R's will take the Senate. If you want to really go out on a limb and sort of hey, here's a crazy prediction. I think it's possible Joe Manchin switches parties.
I think that's a possibility.
If they continue pushing him, they're going to push him right into the Republican Party.
And that happened to Phil Gramm and people like that. So we have
it's
seen
happened
this
before.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. In the late 80s, Phil Gramm was one of the first, and then several people came along with him.
Thurman.
Thurman and several others. They came along as part of kind of the Reagan Revolution. So now, if that happens, if they do take control of the Congress, then it becomes, okay, so now what? What are you going to do with this?
Yeah,
You've got control of one branch, basically. You can, at the very least, stop bad things from happening. And, if the Republicans could take on a little bit of the humility that the D's lacked when they got control of Congress and be realistic about what they can do with control of the legislature, and forget this whole notion of, now it's time to be bipartisan, right? Because bipartisanship in D.C. is always defined one way. What did the R's give up? Okay. Yeah. If you read the electorate properly, okay, just like Biden didn't. Biden was elected to be not Trump. That's it. Okay, and like I said, he took that to mean, oh, go be FDR on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not what the people wanted, which is why your agenda's in the toilet and your popularity is too. If the R's will read the electorate properly and say you are there to stop bad things from happening, that now is not the time to compromise. Kill it all, every bit of it. Every agenda item they bring forth, you vote it down and you force a discussion. Yes, you force a potential, quote, government shutdown, if that's what it takes to get an actual budget passed where we can actually start living according to our means.
That'd be a good idea.
And get control of the deficit and the debt in this country. You will reap the rewards 2 years later when you do have the White House up for grabs again. And you can say, look, we stopped all the bad stuff. All right. Now, here's what we will do if you give us control of the White House and the legislature to remedy some of this stuff. But just don't get over your skis on this thing. Now's not the time, to compromise and talk about bipartisanship and, sing kumbaya. Yay, we got a bipartisan infrastructure bill that only spent fill in the blank $1 trillion that we don't have. Now's the time to kill all that stuff. So that's my hope, right? There's always hope.
Well, I wanted to give some people hope. Let me come to Penna real quickly. Got a couple minutes before we say goodbye. What are your thoughts about 2022?
Well, you can't be a reasonable Democrat right now. You just can't be one. And so, whether Joe Manchin becomes a Republican or not, he's still a force in the Congress and in the Senate. And if the Senate elects another Republican and he stayed a Democrat or becomes a Republican, it's still going to be very narrow. So as Lathan said, you can't, if the Republicans take over, they do have to be reasonable and they have to be consistent with their principles. Joe Biden, Holman Jenkins said this in the Wall Street Journal this week, that the real function of Biden's presidency is really to allow time to pass while Trump fever passes on both sides of the aisle. So you don't have you have people going back to the principles of the Republican Party. Yes, Trump stood for them in many ways, but there's just so much emotion surrounding that. I think we need to get back to politics. We need to get back to regular order in the Congress. And as Lathan said, passing a budget. And really, I think the first order of the day would be to get rid of all the policies that are causing inflation right now. I think that's a big that's a big election issue.
Well, again,
there's a lot more, and Roe versus Wade, Roe may be overturned, so the states will be able to do something about that. The federal government will not necessarily even be involved in that, but that will be a good campaign issue, I think.
And come June, we're going to be looking for the case on school choice, the abortion case, and many others. We're just simply down to the last moment, and let me just encourage you, first of all, pray for Penna as she gets healthy, and certainly pray for everybody there at First Liberty, and hope you will pray for us. We have at least 2 of our staff down as well with COVID positive, so those are some things that you can do, but most importantly, I want to challenge you. We've had very few phone calls today and only a few people going online, so there is room for you to join with us even as we go off the air. You can go to the website, pointofview.net. The match is still on the table, and so, again, I would encourage you to click on that button that says Donate Now, and that is an easy process that you can do. And if you find yourself saying, well, I really do need to talk to someone, until later tonight, we will be answering the phones, and that is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Of course, we have a few people that are ill, so we don't have as many people answering the phone. So probably the best way is simply to go to the website, pointofview.net. And we are grateful for all of you listening, and certainly grateful for those of you that have supported and for those of you considering supporting this ministry. That's all for 2021. I want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer, Ivy for her help as a producer. We'll see you back next week right here on Point of View.
There is an opportunity for you today to light a candle that will burn brightly as we enter 2022 and for a long time to come. Thanks to a $117,000 matching grant, anything you give to Point of View today before midnight will be doubled. Amazing things happen when you give to Point of View. People hear the truth and become empowered to live it out. Point of View has been on the air for nearly 50 years. In that time, listeners have found Christ. They've started ministries. They've impacted untold millions of people. All because listeners like you give generously. When you light a candle with your generosity today, you have no idea how far that light will spread in 2022 and all the years to come. But I promise you, it will be further than you imagine. Remember, right now you can make twice the difference. The $117,000 matching grant ends at midnight, so please give now by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View.